what does healthy actually look like? And
For
that's
us.
something, right? That's something that we have to define for ourselves within the realm of the world we actually live in. Within the
Right.
realm of the world we actually live in, healthy isn't going to look the same way it does for other cultures and other groups of people. It's going to
Right.
look like what is the best way for us to progress and be sustainable moving forward.
What's going on, family? I'm just here to remind you that you can get yourself a copy of my new book, On the Shoulders of Giants, Volume 4, The Caribbean, by visiting my website, www.ontheshoulders1.com, and help support me as I continue on my mission to make sure that my people have our information, even though, there are many people trying to stop us from learning our history. But hey, we can teach ourselves. And one of the tools we can use is my new book, On the Shoulders of Giants, Volume 4, The Caribbean. Remember, visit my website, www.ontheshoulders1.com, to get your copy. And I appreciate your support.
Bam. We back up in this thing. One more again. Welcome back to the On the Shoulders of Giants YouTube channel. I am Joseph Ward, and rocking with me one more again is the big homie, Mr. Patrick Aldarius Irvin. What it look like, what
That's
it
funny.
is, what it used to be. What?
You call
Say
me
big homie.
big homie, yeah. I'm like, yo, is that
Man,
a
just
fat joke? I done lost weight, bro.
I don't know. I just said it. Just take it and run with it. Score a
Okay.
touchdown.
I
That's
got
just score a touchdown. Just don't be that person. All right. Hey man, well, welcome everybody. So I do want to start by saying thank you to everybody who has been supporting this channel. We are really growing, and the growth is amazing. I've been putting in a whole lot of work since 2014. So I want to thank each and everybody who has been a part of this channel growing, all the viewers, all the comments, all the shares, all the likes, everything that everybody is doing, all the donations, all the phone calls, all the emails, everything that everybody has done for this channel, all the work in front of the scenes and behind the scenes. Thank you to everybody. And with you all's energy and help, we're going to continue to grow, because we want to do something that is actually fruitful for our community, something that, giving information that we can use and that we can use immediately right now, that we can employ, that we can use to make our community better. So that's what we're doing. So thank you to everybody. Make sure you all check out my website. You see it scrolling at the bottom of the screen, www.ontheshoulders1.com. You can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/OTSOG. And you know how we do. We back this week with another breakdown. And this week we're breaking down Dr. Joy DeGruy, post-traumatic slave syndrome. So is you ready, Pat?
Word.
Man, let's do this.
Slave syndrome is an explanatory theory that really looks at multi-generational trauma. One of the things that's difficult for people is their first response is, oh my God, that happened so long ago. We're talking about people being captured, shipped, sold, beaten, raped, experimented on. And then you have to ask the question, did the trauma continue? Yes. So 300 years of trauma, no help, freed. No help, more trauma. If it's a sustained trauma, then the impact of that is also sustained. When we look at multi-generational trauma, we're looking at people who are maybe victims of natural disasters and their families and their children, and generations of folks who have experienced war. And we know that there are residual mental, emotional, traumatic impact.
Stop right there. So kind of set a foundation for this post-traumatic slave syndrome, what it is, how it affects people. And that's one of the great things about this video. It does set that, what it is, how it affects people, and things that we can do to help to reverse it. So first she's talking about, well, she started off by laying out the foundation with post-traumatic slave syndrome. So PTSS. So from your understanding, Pat, what is PTSS?
PTSS is a psychological explanation for why we behave the way we behave, to simplify it.
Right.
And the wonderful thing about this is that there aren't many explanatory theories, meaning they explain why something occurs, that go as in depth and that encompass as much as PTSS, which is one of the reasons why I think it caught on so quickly and it's become so popular, is because
Hmm.
it is one of those few theories that doesn't just take this from here and this from there.
Right,
It like looks at everything and says all of these ingredients go into this bowl to make this cake.
right, right. Generational, and I'm gonna keep it simple. Generational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So trauma being passed down from generation to generation, from generation to generation to generation over 400 years, and no correction to this trauma. And so
Right.
remember, so the correction piece, right? Y'all put a pin in that correction piece, even though we're going to say that multiple times before we get to the end. But when we get to the end, we're going to tackle the correction piece. But all these generations of trauma, not just in slavery, but after slavery as well. And then we get to where we are now in 2022, and we see the way we behave. And like you're saying, you have to look at every aspect of what happened to Black people, because really that's what we're asking. Really, in a nutshell, what happened to Black people? PTSS is laying out, like you said, what happened to Black people, every aspect, um, from generation to generation to generation. These people are experiencing physical trauma. They're experiencing spiritual trauma, psychological trauma, emotional trauma, over and over and over, and expected to thrive while
Mm-hmm.
experiencing this trauma, expecting to just get over it. Because that's one of the big things in our community
Mm-hmm.
is the just getting over it aspect, especially for men. Just got to get over it. Not being able, remember, not being able to deal with the trauma. And I'm just, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, my hypothesis, not being able to deal with the trauma, turn to later on down the line is I'm not going to deal with the trauma
Mm-hmm.
because I don't have the capabilities to deal with the trauma, even though I know I need to. Now, there are some who break outside of that and actually go deal with the trauma. But for the large majority, you can see our behavior, we're not really dealing with that trauma.
Right. And the other part of this that I'm going to bring up frequently is epigenetics, because
Yep.
um this is a psychological explanation with biological backing, and it does force you to think about not just, like, I know the framework of it is the trauma that causes behavior, but if you blow that framework up, you can
Hmm.
begin to look at history itself as a framework for why all culture groups behave the way they behave, not just ones that have experienced trauma that's as traumatic and long lasting as 400 years of slavery and oppression. So those things
Hmm.
also come into play. We got to, like, this isn't just a psychological piece. There's a biological component that backs this up. And once you get far enough in that hole, you begin to start thinking about it in terms of normalizing trauma, which is where what you were referring to, you don't have the tools to deal with it. You don't deal
Hmm.
with it. You don't deal with it. And then it becomes normal. And it is
Right.
just the way you
We do
perceive
it.
the world and move about in the world. And in order, at that point, in order to rectify it, you have to not only acknowledge where it came from and why it still persists and all of these other things, but you have to begin to analyze the benefits and the harms, the weaknesses of that behavior, and identify better ways to behavior in given circumstances. So it becomes a
Yeah.
lot more nuanced and difficult to undo those behaviors that become encoded
Right.
like that.
Right. So let's go ahead and define epigenetics now. So epigenetics is the study of how your behaviors and environment can cause changes in the affect the way your genes work. Unlike genetic changes, epigenetic changes are reversible and do not change your DNA sequence, but they can change how your body reads a DNA sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's you're not just harboring, like I said earlier, physical trauma. So you're not just harboring the trauma like in your emotions or spiritually and things, but you're harboring this trauma physically, and it's literally affecting the way your genes express themselves. It's literally affecting the way your body exists, the way your body works. And she's going to
Right.
explain this more and more. So,
Right. Right. And to put a picture to it real quick, and then I'll be quiet.
mhm,
To put a picture to it, you can think of your genes as uh, a light bulb with a knob. And so there's an on and off switch that'll turn the gene expression on and off. But there's also a knob that controls how bright the light switch gets, how much light is expressed through that bulb. So you can think of your epigenetics as that knob, that turning of the dial to show how your genes are expressed and how strong that expression is.
right. Gotcha. That's a good one. That's a good one. Shine on.
And what I did was I started to look at the African American experience, starting with slavery, as a real clear, long enduring trauma. So I started to see that there were clear connections between that survival behavior and contemporary living in African American experience. I started to see common behaviors that I took for granted as, well, cultural. There's adaptive behaviors, survival behaviors. Well, what are they? Let's just say 2019, you have a black mother and a white mother. The sons go to school together. They find themselves at a meeting. The black mother leans over to the white mother and says, I just wanted to mention to you that I noticed that your son is really doing quite well. And the white mother's response is, oh, thank you. She begins to go on and on about he won the science fair, his uncle's an astronaut. She's just oozing. She realizes the black mother's son is actually excelling her son. And she says, well, wait a minute. Your son's the one that's really coming along. And the black mother responds, oh my God, he's a handful, but oh, he just works my nerves. Now, when I'm working with African American people, it doesn't matter what the audience is. It doesn't matter what class. If I were to ask, is she very proud while she's saying those denigrating things? And everybody laughs and goes, of course. There's a secret. Because everybody black knows that even though the black mother is going, oh my God, she's really proud. So now let's roll that scene back 300 years. And let's say this black mother is working in the fields, and a white slave owner comes through and says, wow, that boy is really coming along. What is she going to say? No, he's not. He's stupid. He's shiftless. He can't work, because I don't want you to sell him. So I denigrate them to protect them. That is called appropriate adaptation when living in a hostile environment.
Well, damn. So adaptive behaviors, survival behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was very, very, very interesting and a great point. And I like the way she laid it out with the analogy, because that is something that we still see played out to this day. That's why she has that analogy. I've seen it plenty of times, especially around white men or white women who are perceived as having some sort of authority or power, and the child may say something that is correcting the white person or the child's behavior or anything that's happening with the child, and the mother would go above and beyond to make sure that she punished this child in front of these white people. But like she's saying, it's going back to slavery. It's going back to that survival mentality that a lot of mothers had to adopt. So there you go, the adaptation and survival. So if I punish my son to the highest degree, then you don't have to punish my son, i.e., you don't have to kill my son, or you don't have to sell my son away. So to protect my son, to keep my son with me, to keep my son as safe as possible as I can, I will beat my son, even the daughter. I will beat my child down. I will, I will go to town on them. A lot of people associate the way a lot of black people were whooped, especially when we were coming up. A lot of black people were whooped with slavery. There's connections to that. But like she's saying, it's breaking down the idea of survival. We have to make it, and we have to make it together. So in order for us to make it together, I have to break his soul. I have to break his spirit down a bit. I have to humble him. I have to make him docile. I have to make him adapt a behavior that is suitable so we can stay together. We can stay as safe as possible, even though adapting this behavior realistically is not necessarily keeping us safe. It's not really keeping us safe at all, but it's keeping us as safe as we can be.
Yeah,
That's
it's
how I feel.
it's um because this is one of the things we talked about in the last show with Nearly Fuller Jr. I think it kind of goes into that where
That's why I chose this clip.
yeah, because you know the idea of black people holding each other back, black people doing all like we
It's a why.
right, and there's a spin on the analogy, right? Like because we talk about the crabs in the barrel mentality all the
Right.
time.
All right. Let's
And
get it.
there
Let's
are a
get
few
into it.
people that talk about, well, the barrel isn't the natural habitat of the crab. True enough, that is true. But another way of looking at that scenario would be um when you're pulling the crabs out of the barrel, aren't you getting ready to cook them and eat them? So couldn't it be argued that the crabs holding the other crab back is trying to save that crab's life?
Survival.
Right.
Adapting to your environment, trying to survive in your environment.
So there are a bunch of different ways to look at all these scenarios, but you have to look at them all in context and in totality before you begin. And I've been saying for God knows how long, I believe the superpower of black people is our adaptability. Um, our ability to survive circumstances and situations which other people could not, and we know that they could not because we know
They
of the
didn't.
multitude of people that didn't.
Yeah, they didn't.
Um,
We did. We almost didn't, but we did.
but we did,
Right.
and in a lot of the journals of early Europeans who were involved in a lot of the decisions that were made to subjugate black people, there was that adaptability trait was something that was recognized early on
Right. So we need to go
as a
get some more.
right of something that was beneficial, our propensity to accept our lot in life
Right.
and move in accordance with whatever that lot is as has been dictated. So I think that there's a lot of power in that. And also then once you begin to acknowledge that, you begin to accept and understand just how difficult it's going to be because situations and circumstances, while they might not be in a place where we're facing the same kind of damage, the same level of danger, I'm sorry, recourse hasn't been made.
Right.
There's
At all.
been nothing done to right the ship. So the human body homeostasis rules not just the internal balance, but also personality and expression and culture. Things are going to stay the way they are until something forces them to change.
Right. 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 Let's go.
The little white boy, say Timmy, he feels really comfortable and happy about what his mom just said about him. And Trey looks at his mom and wonders, why can't you be proud of me? Because he doesn't understand the secret yet. And by the time he learns the secret, he will have already been injured by it.
And see, that right there is another powerful point. That right there is another powerful point because a lot of times when we realize what have happened to us and we may be in a position to even counteract what happened to us, it still has a significant effect on how we behave and how we behave with each other. And so it's going to take a lot more work to reverse what happened, reverse the effects. Yeah, I know now, but I had to find out. And like she's saying, the secret, because it's like it's unspoken thing that all black people understand about survival. Now, it is something that is talked about, but it is an unspoken thing when we really understand. Well, the mother, like she's saying, the mother is proud of her son, but the way she's showing that she's proud of her son is to talk about all of his faults in front of this white woman, with the idea of, if I talk about my son this way, if I describe my son in this way, that'll keep him safe, because I really don't know what this white woman or what anybody else might try to do to my son if they feel like he think he's uppity or superior. That's what I'm hearing with that.
I would even go, because there are a bunch of different ways you can go with this one too. I would even go the direction of saying it's a secret because not a lot of people even really understand why they do it. They just do it. It's a cultural thing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, the little
Gene
boy,
expressions.
right? The little boy never finds out why his mom addresses him like that in front of other people, and so he's damaged by it. But he buries that, doesn't deal with it, and then ends up doing it to his kids.
Right.
Um, and so that damage becomes a part of the cultural expression, and it becomes normalized
Right.
damage. And then when people do find out, they either don't have the necessary communications with their kids to explain
Mm-hmm.
it and to work
Mm-hmm.
on changing it, um, or they go too far to the other way and they just start doing too much,
Right.
you
And
know,
spoiling them.
right, spoiling them, overinflating them, putting them in a situation where the real world is going to humble your child because you've raised them to think that they are the greatest thing since the invention of Jesus Christ,
Mm-hmm.
and they not. They just another black person here in America.
Right.
So um I I agree with what you're saying. I just think that like there are like that one section, you can make a whole
It's a lot.
show out of
Yeah,
that.
it's no, it's a whole lot, but we just trying we're making sense of this as best we can, um in a productive manner. So it's coming out like that. But also it makes me go back and think about one of the examples that was used in last week's show with Neely Fuller. I was talking about the barber and how the barber has to make a conscious effort to not treat his son the way his father treated him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't, I'm not going to be overly aggressive and snap on my son and just yell at my son and just
Mm-hmm.
make everything feel like it's punishment with my son, because that's the only way I really know how to exist in the father-son dynamic, because
Mm-hmm.
that's all I was taught. So I have to make a conscious effort that even if my son does something to piss me off, I have to think, I have to be calm and have to think about how I'm going to respond to my son, so I won't continue to pass this trauma down.
And here's another thing I'm going to add on when it comes to the biological component, the epigenetic piece. Um, Epigenetics. So when the egg and the sperm come together, most, not all, but most of the epigenetic markers on the sperm cell are erased. Um, most of the epigenetics on the egg cell are not present as well, but more of them remain than on the sperm cell. But so the kicker here though is those epigenetic markers start forming in the fetus, in the baby, while it's inside the womb. The experiences of the mother while the baby is
Yes.
being
Yeah.
developed are
Yeah.
shaping that baby's genetic
Right.
expression. So
Right.
that's something else to keep in mind here when we're talking about the survival adaptation and how we maneuver about the world. It's not just the direct interactions you have with your child, it's the thoughts and the energies and the environment that you're growing up,
Oh.
that you're
Yeah.
producing that child
Yeah.
in. And in addition to that, one final thing, it's been shown that these epigenetic markers have an impact on your children down to the third and fourth generation. You're talking about your grandkids, your great grandkids, your great great grandkids are going to be influenced by the food you eat, the experiences you've had, and the decisions that you were making when you were 8, 9, 10 years old. So from that perspective, it becomes even more important to analyze a lot of the cultural things that we have in place, the cultural practices that we
Yeah.
have in place, and think about, are we doing what's best, not just for us and our kids, but for our grandkids and our great grandkids.
But also, at when we talk about environment, because the cultural piece will express itself out into the environment. And like you said, the environment matters. The environment will play a part in the shaping of the behavior and behavior genetically, and just the actual behavior of the person expressing themselves within this world. So if if that baby is like in the womb and in an environment that is hostile, that's a stressful environment, that has the mother stressed out, that has the father stressed out constantly, then the baby is born into this ultra stressful environment, experiencing trauma continuously. Because that's a lot of people who, by the time they were 10 years old, the trauma that they experience is overwhelming, and you wonder why the behavior isn't quote unquote normal behavior, or the behavior isn't you know, the behavior that that people would want to see in public. But you got to look at the experience within the environment of the individual. Let's continue.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome. PTSD is a disorder that occurs as a result of a single trauma. You don't even have to be there to actually get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. You could just hear about something horrific happening to someone you love. So you have people who have experienced it firsthand, people who have witnessed it in their environment, right? People who are continuing to be oppressed. That exacerbates any possibility of healing. So it's not post-traumatic stress disorder, because then it becomes part of what we call your socialization process. So you begin to normalize a way of living and being, everything from what we eat to what we believe it means to be a friend. You know, all of these things are colored by history. And if you don't understand it, you're going to fold in things that you've just assumed are normal. But post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future. There was a point where there were, you know, African-American children in different urban settings that didn't expect to live to be adults because they saw so much death, that they started planning their funerals like at 13, 12, as young as 10. When you start looking at the simple biology, you start looking at the impact of stress on health. And while we look at general stress, you know, we know finances, you have illnesses, all these different things. How about being black? How does factoring in being black in America impact your stress level and therefore your body's ability to operate its own immune system? Because we know it.
Hey, so I just want to say real quick, she fine. She's amazing, man. Dr. Joy. I love the way she break it down, but do your thing. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that was a perfect stopping point, because, and I love her too. But the no, but I love her too. The thing with, because you know they say when you say but,
Yeah,
you gotta
you
erase
disqualify
everything
stuff. Yeah,
before that.
yeah.
Yeah, so
She's great.
yeah, no, she's great. She's amazing. And I think all of the people that we're gonna be looking at are amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
But the thing here is, one of the wonderful things here is, I believe it was Harvard and Pittsburgh University. I could be wrong, but I know it was Harvard and somebody else. They did a study a while back. This was a number of years ago, where they found that just being black in America decreased your life expectancy by 7 years or more. Just being black in America reduced the stress of it. And so in here we begin to, now we can talk about like the actual harm that being in a constantly stressed environment has, the stress hormones flowing through your body and all of these other things. When we talk about being in a persistent state of fight or flight, when we talk about stress response and this, that, and the third, and especially even when we begin to talk about things like PTSD, which, you know, a lot of us need to understand, you can give somebody PTSD by sharing your traumatic story with them. All right. That is by causing them to relive a traumatic event that they've had in the past. You can trigger a form of PTSD or a traumatic episode. When you begin to understand how all of these things work, you begin to be a lot more careful about what you say, how you say, and when you say. But what she just hit on there was another point that like could be just like a whole show just on that. And there's a lot like that bit right there that you just that was dense.
Yeah. Like, and just the way she rolled it out though. But in another video, I like the way she breaks it down in that video because she talks about PTSD. So she uses 9/11 as the example.
Mm-hmm.
So there were people on the other side of the world who were traumatized by 9/11, who
Mm-hmm.
just watched it on TV or heard about it or even heard it on the radio, were traumatized by 9/11 in various ways. So what I'm always having a conversation with people is we understand PTSD. Nobody when PTSD is brought up, people's antennas go up and they put their thinking cap on and people just they they can rock with it. But when we talk about the Black experience, the trauma that Black people experience, the PTSD, in our case, the PTSS that we experienced, it's almost like now cognitive dissonance come in and that wall comes in and people just, well, I don't understand that. But you understand PTSD at its core. You can be traumatized by something that you didn't even witness. But when it comes to the Black experience, you're telling us to get over it, or the idea is to get over it. And like we said earlier, you can't get over something like this. You can't get over trauma. You have to go to therapy. You have to deal with it. You have to attack it head on. You have to go to a professional and get things worked out. It's
Yeah,
not a get over with thing.
yeah. I would say, as somebody that has been diagnosed with PTSD, I don't think that we really understand PTSD.
People don't. People
I
don't.
think people understand the concept of trauma, but I don't think they understand the concept of a trauma related disorder like PTSD. And I say that because you see people moving the way they move, and the latest and greatest with celebrity gossip in the Black community, not the latest and greatest now, but a little bit earlier this year, involved the situation where somebody could have given somebody else a traumatic
Trauma,
disorder, trauma, and did not
PTSD.
did not understand how what they did could result and what happened. And it wasn't just that person, but there were supporters and a whole audience of people standing behind them saying the same thing. And I think the disconnect, and this is why I love talking about epigenetics. We need to get
Hmm.
into biology a lot more than we are. This stuff isn't just psychology. The mind and the worldview and the biology are connected. Epigenetics is that missing piece for how we explain how it is that something that happened 150 years ago is still impacting us. Not just in a
Hmm.
world outlook or a cultural sense, but in a very real biological sense. That was a study done. I want to say this was 2014, 2015, where they looked at the descendants of people that had survived in an extreme famine, right?
Hmm.
During this period in time, there was an extreme famine. There was a food shortage, an immense food shortage. People were dying left and right. And they looked at the descendants of those survivors. And you're talking about their grandkids and their great great grandkids. And they still saw biological gene expression in those people resulting from their ancestors living through that famine. They still saw
Yeah.
differences in the way they processed food, differences in the way they responded to food, differences in the types of food they responded to compared to other people in that same group that did not have ancestors that went through that
Right.
particular traumatic event. So the
Right.
evidence is there.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and just even looking at our overall behaviors as individuals with ourselves and our behaviors within our group and how we behave with other groups, right? So she talked about how we handle stress and how we express anger and all these and having outbursts and violence and all these things. So we know a lot of Black communities where the stress is high, there's a lot of violence. Where the stress is high, the food that they consume, the foods they consume are not the healthiest foods,
Mm-hmm.
right? But also, and within these same environments, she talked about the idea or average life expectancy, or the idea of how long I would live. So when we were coming up, when we were teenagers, when we were children, if you were a black male, often you heard, well, most black men or a lot of black men don't live past 21. You know,
Yeah.
the movie Don't Be a Menace to South Central while drinking your juice in the hood had a parody on that in the beginning. And so it's understanding that you have a whole group of young men who are being told over and over, especially if you're in these low income, high stress environments, you've been told over and over and over, you might not live to see 21.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have all of this other trauma and all of this other stress that's happening. You're trying to survive, trying to adapt. The behaviors that you have, excuse me, the behaviors that you have will be survival behaviors, because especially if you internalize the idea that you won't live past 21, you're gonna live life like you're not gonna live past 21. And that's gonna be destructive though.
Yeah. And even and this is again something that black people really need to understand. Because it's up to us to reprogram, to
It
deprogram
is.
and reprogram.
It is.
Um, when we're talking about our health and well-being, this all ties into that. Like you were saying about stress eating, when you got a constant flow of the stress hormone, cortisol and other things flowing through your system, you're more likely to eat things that are not healthy, things that are high in sugar and glucose and other things that can give you an energy spike so that you're able to respond to the
Mm-hmm.
impending stress. But
Mm-hmm.
if there is no impending stress and you're just constantly stressed, then that puts you in a situation where you're
Yeah.
experiencing high levels of anxiety, bad eating habits. And
Yep.
I'm saying we need to
Not sleeping.
understand this. Right. Sleeping is a huge issue.
And that could cause GI issues.
Blood pressure issues, heart
Yep. Heart
conditions.
disease.
And
Yeah.
we saying this not so that we can run out and use it as an excuse, but so that we
So we
can
can fix what's
understand
going on.
what's right. Well, so we understand what's going on, so we can fix it, because it's not an excuse; it's a
Right.
reason.
Right. 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 Let's move forward.
We know it compromises the immune system. Once you understand it, then you can deal with it. Because you see, it's habitual. You socialize. It becomes part of your being. So one of the ways you begin to address that multi-generational trauma is to work with the people it directly impacts, to hear from them. And when you give the people the information, they can use it. I think the first order of business is beginning to have a conversation. And the other is to educate the larger society. You have to stop the assault. So this is not purely a clinical thing. This requires social justice and change. That's where part of the healing is. It's not in a clinical setting or in a pill. It's in fairness and justice and safety and equity. We got to work with some of those clinical things, some of those issues of panic and anxiety. And we also have to deal with the fact that you have a system that is set up to oppress you and to continue to injure you. Both those things have to be dealt with. And they cannot singularly by themselves affect a change. They have to be done collectively.
So I do agree, but some of it I don't. As for it's not well, not, I'm not going to say I disagree, but I do think that we have to be able to heal within a system that's going to continue to assault us. We have to learn to do that. Now, I do agree with the overall thing that she said, to really defeat this overall, like really, it's going to have to be a total system of justice that replaces the system of white supremacy. I do agree that. So that means everybody who claim they good, and no matter your race, everybody who claim they good, going to have to be that good that you claim you are. I do agree with that. But I still believe that white people, until that happens, white people are going to be who they are. Those who are the races, those who participate in, they're going to be who they are. And we have to learn how to heal and get to that and get to a healthier state with all this going on. And I know it's going to be difficult. It's definitely going to be difficult, But that's something we're going to have to do because the assaults won't stop. Yes, we want the assaults to stop. We want to get to this ideal, but for right now, being realistic, the assaults won't stop. So how are we still going to heal ourselves as best we can, still under assault?
Well, this is where I come into, because I agree with you. If we're going to take ownership of this process, it's got to be something that we can do
Yeah,
on our own.
right.
And so the problem you run into there is with the suggestions like these, and in an ideal world, that would be the perfect way to go. White people take responsibility, the system changes, and black people are given the room that they need to adjust. But that's not the world we live in, because that's
Right.
where earlier when I was talking about looking not just at PTSS, but looking at the framework she presents as to
Mm-hmm.
how history creates cultural expression. Well, if we look at how their history has created their cultural expression, there's no incentive, there's no reason for
To
them to
stop.
change, because they,
Right.
like you always say, they winning.
Right.
So
Why would I give up my power on my wins?
right. So from there, I think we got to turn on a dime and think about it a different way. What does healthy actually look like? And
For
that's
us.
something, right? That's something that we have to define for ourselves within the realm of the world we actually live in. Within the
Right.
realm of the world we actually live in, healthy isn't going to look the same way it does for other cultures and other groups of people. It's going to
Right.
look like what is the best way for us to progress and be sustainable moving forward. And I don't think that piece has been clearly defined, because everybody, when they use the term healthy, they don't really define what they mean by healthy.
Right.
And
Right.
so that leaves it up to us to assume that they're talking about the status quo of what health is.
Right.
And that's
Right.
not us, that's them.
That's not right. Right. Because and I just say when I, because I know I've said it a while, I've said it a couple times, but when I say healthy, I mean black people being able to realistically deal with the trauma that has happened
Mm-hmm.
to us, being starting to reverse this trauma, because starting to reverse this trauma that has happened to us, it will improve the way we relate with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And once the way that we're related, that we relate with each other starts to improve, our overall health as generations come will start to improve. Our overall mindsets, our overall spiritual health, any aspect of health that you're looking at, that will start to improve. We are moving back closer to balance versus imbalance. And that's body, mind, soul,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, all those things. It's black people being able to exist in a stress-free environment, in an environment where we're not expecting violence to happen to us. We're not expecting some kind of traumatic situation of somebody separating our family, or somebody being killed, or I going back to what we said earlier, I have to be severely, brutally beaten by my parent in order to be able to survive. We live in an environment that we created for ourselves, that we redefined for ourselves, that is safe for us, that is that has eustress, not distress. And the
Yeah.
way we relate to each other is a positive manner where we're constantly building each other up rather than tearing each other down.
Yeah. And that a healthy environment is not an environment that's totally absent of stress.
Right. Right.
Like, and we got to be clear about that. For those that are deep into psychology, you know that recently there's been a number of studies and reports come out that show that there is a lot of negative outcomes and dangers associated with being overly positive, or being in an overly positive environment, or having an overly positive mindset. Negativity and being in danger and things like that, they do have their benefits. And that's why I love when you said balance, because balance is having both in necessary amounts.
Yeah.
um a lot of times the negative situations are what forces the positive change. A lot of times being surrounded in positivity all the time forces stagnation and makes you vulnerable to unexpected outcomes. So
Mhm.
as a culture group, we got to define that. And to me, that starts on an individual level and on a household level, because the way Joseph Ward runs his household isn't going to be the same way that Patrick Irvin runs his household. But
Mhm.
they can both exist and they both should exist within a larger cultural framework that governs the way our households interact with each other,
Right.
so that as a group we can continue to progress forward.
Right. Right.
So as individuals we can start there with, all right, what does healthy mean in my environment? If I'm living around a bunch of racist crackers, healthy
That's
means
not
staying,
healthy.
yeah, right. Healthy means getting to a new environment. But while I'm
Right.
in that environment, what is advantageous and healthy for me to do is to make sure that I'm safe. So I might do things and I might behave a certain way and acquire certain things that in a different environment is extremely unhealthy. Now, the overall goal is to get out of that dangerous environment
Mhm.
and into a better one. But that goes into my point of saying you got to evaluate these things based on your environment, but you also have to have a plan for, okay, well, how
Right.
can I get into a better
Right.
environment?
Right. So that's why for me, solution and in conjunction with what you're saying is therapy. First thing that
Yes.
comes to my mind is therapy. Some people need more therapy than others, but we all it's just real.
No,
I
no,
ain't trying
no.
to be
It's just
funny.
no. It's the way you
Yeah.
said it. But no, you're
Yeah.
right. You're right. No, you're right. You're 100
Right.
percent right.
But I think we need a a specific kind of therapy that will deal with the generational trauma. A specific type of therapy that will target the things that is really affecting each individual, understanding how it's affecting the individual, and giving the individual the tools to master that and reverse that, and to be able to move back toward balance. Right,
Mm-hmm.
because you are right, like earlier, you are right. um it's about balance, not a total absence of stress, but it's balance, right? So being able to be in front of professionals who have the proper cultural lens, though,
Yes.
because
Right. Right. Right.
it's not just going to therapy, it's going to therapy to people who truly understand the trauma that Black Americans have had over the last 400 years, since 1492, or even before that, when white people first showed up and first started doing things, especially that affected us here in this Western Hemisphere. So a specific type of therapy, culturally based, that's targeting the specific effects from the specific individuals. Because now we're going to talk about client-centered counseling. Now we're going to get into that. Motivational interviewing, those using techniques like that to be able to ask questions, to be able to get at the core of the issue. If you Black in America, we all need therapy. We all need therapy, because
Yeah.
therapy is going to be a tool, not the tool, but a tool that we use to help us reverse these destructive behaviors that we have, to help reverse that NIGGA mindset.
No,
So,
and what you're saying is so relevant. And the reason I laugh is because when you said what you said, it made me think about my situation. Right. I started in
mhm,
therapy thinking, I'm gonna be finished in 2-3 months. Right.
mhm,
2 years later, right? I'm still in therapy, right? Like
yeah,
still getting it sorted, and not just in therapy for the PTSD, but in therapy for other things. So there was a period of time where I was going to therapy 3 times a week, seeing 3 different therapists. Um, but it was what was needed for me and my experiences and what I've gone through. And I still see a therapist once a month. But so it's so I could laugh at that because I feel like I was kind of on the interesting end of the spectrum of thinking that, oh, I would be, like most people, oh, this shit's gonna be over quick. And then that's not what happened. I ended up in therapy, still in therapy for years. Um, you know, and then even going to marriage therapy and going to other forms of therapy so that the people that live with me can understand and get some of their issues worked out. But the wonderful thing that taught me in a very direct and real sense, because I first started trying therapy in 2015 and it did not go well. Um, I did not do my due diligence in vetting the therapist, and I got a bad therapist that unpacked a lot of stuff, and I had to figure out how to deal with it. Um, Make sure just because somebody's black doesn't mean that they're the right
Right.
therapist for you.
Right. Right.
And make sure that they're giving you therapy and not the other way around. I know we love to be giving advice to people and whatnot. I mean, hell, we're doing it right now. But when you're in a situation where you're seeing the trained professional to help you work through things and make sure your mind is right, make sure that they're not unloading on you
Yeah.
during those sessions. Have the confidence and the courage to be able to say, look, this ain't gonna work. I'm
Right.
gonna keep looking
So
to find somebody better.
so in my experience, in my personal experience, at FAMU, you know, I studied psychology at FAMU, so I had a chance to be around therapists who have an African-centered lens,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to receive I would say a psychological education from a African-centered lens, and a lot of the things that we learned is the, you know, basically the who, where, who, what, where, when, why, and how. And so that they basically broke all that down. They taught us, all right, this is white psychology,
Mm-hmm.
and this is black psychology, and this is why black psychology exists. And so the idea is black psychology exists to reverse the effects of white psychology, because being a black person in America, you're indoctrinated in a culture into this American society, this Western society. They have the dominant culture. Those are the things that dominate. But delving into this black psychology, delving into these black therapy techniques and these counseling techniques and these mental health techniques to help us reverse the effects of what slavery and racism and Jim Crow and everything after that did to us, even down to till today, the way we are treating each other. It's taking a realistic and critical look at our behavior. So one of the things, if you look at other black people and you see anger, resentment, trepidation, you have any ill feeling, the ill will toward black people, yeah, you're one of them. I'm guilty of it. Walking down the street, see a group of black people, see a group of black men, and automatically people's mindset goes to something bad, as if a group of good black men can't walk down the street. I'm saying that because I've done that before. I've
Mm-hmm.
had to check. I've literally had to check myself for looking at black people, and the first thoughts come to my mind are negative thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
But also being able to go back and realize that these are the things that I was taught either consciously or unconsciously. These are the things that came out of my environment. I tell you right now, my environment that I live in right now, I'm working hard as hell to get out of this environment. It's trash. It's not a good environment. It's not a healthy environment. Kudos to my mom. Kudos to my mom and my dad and all the OGs that we had, because they worked hard to make sure that we had a slightly different program. And I say slightly different because the programming ain't too different, but it's a slightly different program.
Well,
It's a different enough. It's a different enough
different enough.
programming for me to be able to have a different outlook on life and be able to critically analyze myself and where I am in today in the world. Because if I hadn't had those people, and kudos to those people for even having the mindset to even think outside the box, because it's just little blips of that, just being able to get outside that matrix helps, because it helps to create individuals that can help push the culture forward in a positive manner, push the culture forward to balance. So if had not having these individuals in my life, I would just be another quote unquote product of my environment, and uh, adding more negativity than positivity to the environment. but still understanding that my environment has an effect on me. And even now, I need to get out of this environment. That's why I'm working my ass off to get out of this environment, because this environment is not conducive to my growth.
But I would say that we're all still products of our environment. Just your
Well, yeah.
environment was different enough
What
to allow
I
you to
should say,
see, you know what I'm saying?
I should say not a negative product of my environment. I would
Yeah,
say that.
I get you. I get you. I get you. Um, and I agree with that actually, because I went through a traditional psychology program when I got my
Mm-hmm.
psychology degree. And the only time they spoke about black people was when they talked about counterculture. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
FYI, that's not a positive thing.
Right.
So, for, for those of you that have never been through a traditional psychology
You
program,
rebels, you.
the last thing you want to be reading about in the counterculture section of a psychology cultural textbook is your
Yeah.
culture. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not a good look. But um, the same with you. I had people in my environment early on growing up that were able to point some things out to me so that I was able to see the signposts when I decided to finally open my eyes and look. Because just like most young people, you get the information, but there's no real context, no real relevance to it because you haven't experienced anything that makes it real.
Mm-hmm.
Your parents telling you that the world is cold and cruel doesn't mean anything when you get McDonald's every day of the week. Like,
Right.
what are you talking about? So your parents telling you that white people are, there are a lot of white people out there that don't have your best interests at heart and really want to see you fail. That doesn't mean anything when your teacher's white and she's always talking about how much she cares about you, and you got 2 or 3 cool white friends at school, and you got all of this, and you play on the football team with the sports teams, and you in the clubs with white people, and this, that, and the third. It doesn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't until I had a real experience, one that I was able to recognize, that all of that stuff started to click in, and I was able to then open my eyes and see the different shades of gray that exist in the world. And that's something I think we do got to give the youth a little bit more, leniency with their ignorance with what's going on. When you live in
Yeah.
a sheltered world, you can't be blamed for not believing that there's danger out
Right.
there, and we
Right.
shelter the
Right.
shit out of our kids.
Well, yeah. You do not live in reality. But even like just the way different people process certain things, that are traumatic. So
Mm-hmm.
my two little brothers, 19 and 18. So the youngest one, he had they both had N-word experiences. One directly, one indirectly. But talk about how trauma works. So the oldest brother, he has some white boy that he calls his friend. And we trust me, we got on him. We like, bro, that ain't your friend. But he was like, the white boy said, hey, what's up? And called him the N-word. So the oldest one, he was like, he was just joking. So myself, my dad, and the youngest brother looking at him like, boy. And so me and my daddy just, we straight up, hey, first of all, don't you ever let nobody call you that, let alone a
Mm-hmm.
white boy. And hey, it, I wish, we went there,
Nah,
but not,
I
not,
get you.
we said that, but we still gave context. It's like, we're not saying go be violent. Violence should be your every response. But what we are saying is, at the end of the day, it's about respect.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody respects you, they wouldn't want to call you. And I told them about all the white dudes we went to school with. I was like, Luther Lee. Luther Lee ain't think about calling us that. And some of the stuff that these black folk did to him, he ain't think about calling us that, right? But in his he was in an environment that was conducive for his behavior because he was in a predominantly white environment. And so 4 years in this environment, being acculturated in this environment, existing in this environment with all these white boys and trying to fit in, versus my youngest brother. I forgot the exact environment they was in, but it wasn't school. It was some other environment. And he heard a white boy call his granddad the N-word. He was like, I never forgot. He hated it. It was one of the worst things that ever happened to him in his life. And he was like, I never forget that. And you can see the look on his face, like he wanted to spark somebody.
Yeah.
But he was in an environment that was conducive for his behavior. So we're talking once again, environment responses, actual responses, genetic responses, mental responses, psychological responses, all these different things to coming back to being to that one word. But that one word is so powerful because that one word has shaped us into what we are today and how we behave with each other today. And I'm gonna keep talking about that. We got to be able to break the N-word mindset. Forget, because I don't get how people say, well, we need to stop using the word. Well, what you gonna do about the behavior? You got to kill the behavior. You got to reverse the behavior. We have to attack the behavior. We have to attack our N-word behavior that we have against each other. But you got to be, as individuals, I'm gonna say it different. We as individuals, Joseph, starting with you, Joseph, we have to be willing to take critical looks at what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how is it affecting us. Like you said earlier, the way I exist in my house, it's the way I exist in my house, but it should be conducive to the way you exist in your house, as far as us being able to uplift and grow and better ourselves in our communities, right? So the way I exist in my house shouldn't be counter to the way you exist in your house, or counter to the way we would exist around each other, because that don't help. So yeah, the way I exist in my house and my own privacy still affects the way it affects everything else and affects everybody else around me. Yes,
No,
it does.
it does. And we got to stop with this, well, what I'm doing don't affect no, that's not
Yes, it
true.
does. Yes, it
And
does.
that's a whole other show as well, going into how even the most benign, most uh, insignificant action that you take infects and affects the world around you and their perceptions and their interactions with not just you but people that look like you, and that's on both sides of the coin. So and it's funny you tell that story, because I'm not going to get into the story, but I got a 18-year-old son and a 17-year-old son that had police experiences, and the way they reacted to them were totally different. But even thinking about myself, I was in the 4th grade. I'll never forget that. I was in Miss Hoganmuller's class at Kate Sullivan Elementary School in Tallahassee, Florida. White boy, I forget his name. His name was Ben, I think. Called me a nigger and said, "Why don't you go back to where you came from?" And I slapped the shit out of that white boy. And ever since then, it was the 4th grade. Ever since then, I have not felt good at all about anybody calling me a nigga.
Don't
Because
call me that.
Ben always flies back in my head, and even though I slapped the shit out of him and his face was red for the next 2 days, I was still pissed off because all I did was slap him. I was like, nah, man, I was supposed to ball he was supposed to,
But
but
see that. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, because I was just gonna say, but I because I get where you're going, but that's the part of the powerlessness. It's
Right.
like because really our only response is to be able to whoop somebody's ass.
Right. That's where I was going. You see, that's why I said go ahead, because we here with it. We here with it.
Right.
And violence can't, like you said, violence can't be the only recourse we have. That's not a good answer, because it's not an answer we can consistently win and control the outcomes for, especially not in a system where we're powerless. We get say it is true, and every black person can beat up 5 white people, right? You're assuming we're gonna have a straight up fade 1-on-1
with terrorists,
right? Like you
who's already
assuming,
shown you ain't no straight fade,
right? Like and so not even getting into the ludicrousness of the thought that every black person can beat up 5 people, and we bring that up because we've heard it said in a lot of circles, without even bringing up the sheer idiocy of that thought. And yes, I'm attacking that hard because that's disrespect to an opponent that's been whooping your ass for the last few centuries. That's not how we turn this ship around. That's not how that happens. So So to even think that, like, shows a lack of understanding for the amount of power that we don't have in this situation, and what is realistically at our disposal to make changes into
Yeah.
to create change.
Yeah. You know, all basically all in all, we have to be aggressive about reversing the negative and the destructive behaviors in us as individuals and us as a collective. So going back to what I was saying, Joseph, it starts with you. Joseph, you have to fix the trauma that's within you, Joseph, and then go from person to person to person to person. We got to be real with ourselves. But once again, finding the proper therapy, the proper counseling, the proper help, culturally based, that can actually deal with the actual trauma that we're dealing with, and not give us more trauma or give us more baggage that we don't need to handle. Because there are a lot of people who've gone through therapy, but they've not necessarily gotten better.
Right.
So getting the
Right.
right therapy, but having the right people with the right tools in place. So we got a lot of work to do.
Yes, we
So,
do.
but once again, going back to, if therapy is what you do, then you up the bat. It's your time is now,
Yeah.
right? Your time is
Mental
now.
health
Therapy is
workers
what you do.
unite.
That's why I go back to saying, whatever your gift or your talent is that you bring to the world, even if it's teaching people how to do balloon animals, you might get somebody a job. I don't know what it is, but you need to be doing that within our community and within the framework of working toward a healthy balance. Because we got to fix ourselves, but it starts with you, Joseph. It starts with you. So with that being said, yeah, love y'all. As always, love y'all. www.ontheshoulders1.com, patreon.com/OTSOG. Remember, get Pat's book, The Chasm, Amazon.com. Make sure you get a copy of The Chasm. The Chasm is the growing divide between Black men and women. It's breaking down the growing divide and how to fix the growing divide. So it's another tool that we can use. Pat has a tool that we can use to help fix our growing divide. Let's shrink that divide. Let's be better. Let's do better. Let's live better. And let's be the best versions of ourselves. And yeah, I love everybody out there once again. And y'all check out this next video and keep it going on the Shoulders of Giants. We are out. Y'all are the great.